pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Today is Thursday, October 21st. The time is 12 p.m. This is a special meeting of the Greensburg Board of Works and is called to order. At this time, please silence electronic devices. To comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the city requests that participants complete a voluntary anonymous survey. It's available in the back of the room. Amy, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Glenn Tebby.
Here.
Karen Rust.
Here.
Rodney King.
Here.
And Jamie Kane.
I knew Jamie wasn't going to be here today as well. There being no old business, we'll go directly to new business. The point of today's special meeting is to review the city policy handbooks. You all have been provided a copy of that. Julie Nobby has been working on this very extensively with Taylor Hunter, who's to my left, to revise, review, and I'll let them really drive the meeting as far as discussionary points. Part of what we're trying to do is Julie has in front of her the 3 copies of handbooks that were for police, for fire, for regular city and utility employees, and it is currently contradictory, it is hard to interpret, it has giant holes. So with Taylor's help and Julie, we've been able to, I think, condense it, streamline it, bring us up to legal standards that we didn't have before, which is kind of scary, and incorporate this into a much simpler document to use. So we'll be sure to let them do that. What I think today's mission is, and obviously there's a quorum, this is a public meeting, decisions can be made. I think the goal, unless we decide differently towards the end, should be for us to review the policies, listen to Julie and Taylor about what we've changed and why, and then arrive at pretty confirmed consensus that this is a version, or these tweaks that we're going to make today, if any, really relate to what we want to present to the council at their November meeting for adoption through an ordinance, right? Not a resolution. Has to be an ordinance.
It's an ordinance, yes.
Which would require 2 readings. They could suspend the rules, it doesn't involve money, but if they don't want to do that, then we would need them to have November's reading and December's reading in order for a January 1st implementation of this policy. A big part of that is paid time off versus vacation, sick, and personal time, so that first of the year piece is kind of important. So with that, today if we could arrive at either a firm answer, if we recommend this to the council, we're going to vote on it right here in this public meeting, or this is our strong approval, and we will vote on that at the November 1st meeting for the Board of Works to present to the council at their November 1st meeting as well. The point being, we want to get them a copy in advance in the packet, so if you approve it an hour before their meeting, they don't have time to review it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Any questions off the top before we kind of, Julie, you want to drive a little bit? And, oh, one other thing real quick. There has been a committee reviewing this. Dr. King was the Board of Works, myself, Taylor, obviously, Julie and Amy, Donna represented the utilities, Nate from fire, and Mike from police. So,
And Brian was involved.
Brian Winning, yeah, fire as well. So we've had a pretty wide, I think, breadth of people involved in this. So anyway.
And I also want to stress the time that has been put into this. It's not just, I know since I've been elected, it's been at least 3 meetings of longer than 2 hours. It's been extensive, and that's just the committee meeting. We've also had meetings with individual department heads, lots of emails. Julie has spent hours and hours raking through this just to make sure that everything's worded correctly. So this has not been dealt with lightly.
So the first thing, I just want to talk about how different it looks. We had a city handbook, a police handbook, and a fire handbook before. Now we're going to just one handbook, and this one even has fewer pages than one of these. So Taylor went through them all and really kind of condensed them. They were very similar, but yet there were little differences in each one. And then she put addendums at the back of this handbook for the police department, for the fire, and for the city that would kind of pertain to just them. So that's one of the main things we did. The biggest other part is the PTO time. So in the old handbook, we had vacation hours, sick hours, personal days, And now we have combined all of those into PTO hours. So now all your vacation, your personal, and your sick days are now PTO hours. So we had to come up with how quickly they're going to accrue those PTO hours and try to get it as similar to the amount of time off that they had in the old handbook. So we tried to stay as consistent as possible, but when you're switching from a fire department that earns their vacation in weeks and you go to hours, there's gonna be some differences. So like in the old handbook, a fireman has to take his vacation in a weekly increment. You can't do a half a week, you can't do a day, your vacation is a whole week. Now we're switching to hours, it's gonna give them a little bit more flexibility. They can take one day off, they don't have to take it as a week. So it does provide the employees with some flexibility. Also, fire department, they had to turn in a sick note anytime they had a sick day. Now you're not gonna have sick hours, you're gonna have PTO hours. So they're gonna get a little bit more flexibility with that. Another reason we went with PTO is departments. We would have employees or department heads coming in. Why do we have all these different days? Why can't we just go to PTO time? So it's not something that we just dreamed up. It's been brought up over the last couple of years since I've been here.
Can I add something to that? So with the PTO, what's very helpful is prior, you'd always have to validate, is this a sick day, vacation, personal, and it's a really big administrative burden. Now, there's still stopgaps in place. If you have employees who aren't in advance requesting the time off, maybe potentially abusing, saying they're sick, they're not, there's still procedures in place that can prevent that, but this just gives a lot more flexibility and reduces the administrative burden on it as well.
Any questions about the PTO? Because it's a huge part of the handbook.
Yeah, this isn't the first time I've looked at this anyway. And there has been really a great decimal points even to try and get this to the point of being very near what was in terms of time off and so forth. So I think I understand the change and why you made that change, and appreciate the effort that was put into it. I trust the employees will as well.
Chief, were you okay with switching from weekly requests off to hourly and daily?
Yeah, it was actually my suggestion for that. That was one of the things that is somewhat hampersome. There will be some that still take it in weekly increments, but that gives people freedom to do that. Like if they're gonna use their vacation time and only need one day, they'd have to burn the whole week. So the biggest thing that I see is the sick time usage and not having a sick slip. You know, the city utilizes SwiftMed. Well, SwiftMed is billed upon usage, and you know, we last year before we kind of helped with retirements and worked around that, we had individuals taking all their sick time that they weren't going to be able to use and take with them, so they were burning sick days by calling SwiftMed every third day. Well, that reports back to the city as a high usage of SwiftMed. Now all of a sudden our insurance costs go up because we're utilizing this perk. A, it's abuse of the system. B, you know, when their insurance go up and they're mad about that, well, this is the reason why. So utilizing it to be, you know, and we're still have in-house checks and balances. So, you know, if there's an abuse of time off, then we're going to look at an absenteeism and why is that? It'll eventually end up here at this board. But I do believe it allows, it closes up some of those loopholes, as well as hopefully it'll lower some insurance costs by not having SwiftMed used and abused. It's easy for them, but yet they're not paying for it. It's a perk, but yet the city, and then we're gonna have to pass that cost on eventually as health insurance costs go up. So it does help with only having one day. I think it's more realistic, and it addresses what's going on now. It actually just kind of conforms to that a little bit more.
Next thing I had was instead of earning vacation on January 1st of each year, the old handbook, you got all your vacation time earned on January 1. Now you're going to start accruing PTO time on your hire date or your anniversary date. So as soon as you're hired, you start accruing PTO hours each week. We do have something in the handbook that says when you're hired, newly hired, you cannot use any PTO time for the first 6 months. So in the old handbook, you really couldn't use this, you didn't start earning sick days until you've been here about 5 or 6 months. So it's trying to keep with that line of thinking. If you've hit one of those marks where you're bumping up in how much you accrue, like you've been here 4 or 5 years and it's now time to earn more PTO time each week, you're gonna earn that on your anniversary date. So the anniversary date starts to come into play. And this just kind of seemed to make sense to align more with PTO.
There's also a prorated lump sum, so when we switch over January 1, no one's losing any accrued time. So they'll have that PTO bank and then they'll automatically start accruing. The other reason why especially we started looking at this was because the way it was set up before, it was very odd where you almost had a short window of time based on your date of hire where you had to use all of this accrued time, and it was not really equitable depending on when you were hired. So this really cuts that out, and based on hire date then everyone accrues. And it also cuts down on those who are hired and versus getting everything up front and then leaving and getting paid time off for time they didn't earn. Now they earn that as they go. So it's also an incentive for retainment too.
We also changed some wording for workers' comp for police and fire. This will provide payment for them if they are injured on the job, and it's just a short term to get them by until like disability or something like that could take effect. There wasn't anything in the old handbook to help them out if they got injured on the job, so we've worked with Taylor on that wording.
Which was kind of a big deal and a big oversight in the last one. And it's a benefit. I mean, they are protected when that time, if that time comes.
Yeah, because with the old handbook, if somebody got hurt running into a burning house, they were gonna have to use their sick time if they wanted those days paid, if they were gonna miss work, so.
Yeah, there's a weird carve out, it's in the law for police and fire that you don't have to cover them for workers' comp because it's so expensive, and a lot of employers don't, but they often have supplements, and the old handbook did not, so that was, I think, a good addition in this one.
And we did look through, I don't have the numbers, but we did ask the insurance company to provide us a quote on what that would be annually, and it's very, very expensive. It's actually better for us to adopt it through policy and paid wages than it is just to pay the premium on that, and in hopes that we never use it, obviously.
Right.
So it's easier to write it down and then spend the money to do the wages, because at a certain point, disability or FMLA and all that kind of stuff kicks in, right?
Yeah, well, it's through InPurse, they've got some type of disability policy through them, but it's not for that short-term period, so.
Yeah, there's typically at least a 10-day waiting period, if not more, for that. And it's only 2/3 wages, so this can also help supplement, so they're not reducing it.
Another thing was the unpaid leave of absence. So if an employee has been out for an injury or illness and they've used up all their FMLA time, all their vacation, all their sick, everything, we also have an unpaid leave of absence. And this was something we used about 2 years ago, went to the Board of Works for approval on an unpaid leave of absence. And in the old handbook, it said 180 days could be approved. During that unpaid leave of absence, we continue to pay their health insurance. And so it was brought up at that Board of Works meeting, why is it 180 days? So we decreased it down to 90 days. That was something that was brought up then. Let's see here.
Well,
So
and
now
that's
it's good.
understanding
Yeah.
too, this is after, so FMLA is 12 months, and then you can have
12
through
weeks.
the, I'm sorry, 12 weeks, and then you can have through your PTO time, but then also there's this group sick bank that you can also
Yeah.
utilize, so you're already talking probably someone's been out a year at that point, so then another 180 days that's pretty extensive.
And the other thing we changed with that is to move it to like a committee appointed by the mayor. Rather, with the PTO time, people may use up their PTO time, and we're wondering if this is going to bring up more of these instances where people are out of PTO time and they want that unpaid leave of absence. So now, instead of going to the Board of Works, we brought up maybe we should have a personnel committee or some type of committee appointed by the mayor that we don't have to go to the Board of Works every time somebody needs a few days off.
We also changed the wording to where we can go up to 90 days. It's not,
Right.
the way the old wording was, it was kind of like here's your 180 days, take it or leave it. Well, I want 60 of those and I wanna save the rest, no, sorry.
No,
And then you get the.
they could do, like, the Board of Works would only
Okay.
approve like
We
30 days.
We could do it up to that amount.
Yeah.
And another portion of the committee conversation was, one, a lot of times when this happens, we're bringing somebody's like health relation or injury or something like that to the board. We're being really, you know, employee number 701 has XYZ, and that's all we can tell you, right? And you just have to kind of blindly approve it. Whereas if we're doing it in a committee setting, we can go through the details, we can ask them questions, we can, you know, make sure that we're not being, you know, led astray. And you guys have seen, this board has seen in the last couple months where we've had one that was right after the previous Board of Works meeting, they were off, and then we had to retroactively grant it in a way that is fine, but we're really operating for 20 days in a way that we probably shouldn't be.
Yeah, because the insurance wants to know as soon as their insurance is done, you know, and we're in that little window where it's like, we would almost have to, like you said, we're retroactively, you know,
I
approving
can see a
those.
real advantage to the committee, I can. And I don't have any objection necessarily. I guess the makeup of the committee would be important. You wouldn't necessarily want to, I guess it'd be important to have at least some representation from the Board of
Right,
Works.
I believe that's already.
I don't know, is it laid out, is the committee
It's
laid
broad- I
out?
think it's broad enough to say appointed by the mayor.
Yeah, I
so that
think,
way-
as I recall, it was just appointed by the
Yeah.
mayor. Maybe, if there's a tweak, it might be that appointed by the mayor to include, you know, somebody from, you know, a member of the Board of Works, a member of whoever, I don't, who needs to be there, but maybe it might be important to identify,
We could at least put a minimum, at least one other member of the Board of Works, or,
yeah.
because like we would obviously want Julie.
Yeah,
as
we'd
the
want
HR.
somebody, we'd want somebody from personnel, and maybe somebody from that department whose person's requesting to be lead from, and, you know, a member or two of the Board of Works. That's sufficient. I wouldn't want a quorum, and then you've gotta make a public meeting, but, so, yeah, that's
And-
my recommendation.
And there was something in there that if this committee would decline the request, they can appeal it to the Board of Works.
Sure.
We, just so, for lack of better terms, so we don't end up sort of down a pigeonhole that doesn't work in the future, right? We're not gonna catch all those. At least, in addition, because I serve as a
Your Board of Works member,
but I think I appoint myself, right? It's not
yeah.
statutory that I serve on this board. So, you know, at least two members, right, would be potentially the mayor and someone else from this board. And then, you know, we would have the department head, I assume, whoever is working that's requesting it, come to that committee and say if they don't serve on it, right?
Right.
Because like the way we did the handbook is we wanted to be sure police, fire, and utilities were represented because they are the ones that have odd shifts and meetings. We kind of found the right people for that. Would you be okay with just at least two members of the board?
Oh, we could just say two members. You wouldn't
Yeah.
say at least, just say
Well,
two
it
members.
couldn't be more than two.
Yeah, well, then you're in public meetings, so
Sure.
two members
Yeah.
would work.
If the person making the request is a department head, should we include another department head to come in part of the committee?
I think we would have a standing committee that would include, so like we have a personnel committee, I don't know who's on it, but I think the fire chief, the police chief, Rick Denny,
Well, the sick bank
That's,
city.
you might be thinking of
the
sick bank.
yeah, so we kind of have, you know, but there may always be a department head on, there should always be at least one or two department heads, I would think, on that. I mean, I think this is an internal facing committee, like, I don't think we're gonna appoint people from outside.
No, yeah, I think we should.
And maybe that's something internal.
Well, and I would caution you from not necessarily putting in actual, titles, just in case sometime they're not available and then the person says, well, my due process was violated because I was supposed to have such or such there. So when you keep it vague, it's always better, but with the understanding internally that we are going to have, department heads or whoever on there. That would be my suggestion, at least. I like the
Yeah.
idea of saying the two board members and then those appointed by the mayor or something to that
I
effect.
like your thinking.
Okay, we can make that change.
Yeah, and that, that can be made, next month. I mean, after, it can be added in the final editing of the handbook when it's adopted, so, along with anything else that may come up.
Okay,
Cleaned up wording for holidays for police officers. We needed to clean that up a little bit just because we have some officers that work an 8-hour shift, some that work a 10-hour shift. The group sick bank wording, we aligned that more with PTO. There were changes that had to be done there. The group sick bank is not one of those things that is designed for you to enter right away when you get hired. You need to be able to have enough time built up to enter it. You wanna, in a way, make it difficult for people to get into it. You don't want somebody that's been here 3 months, 6 months to get into that group sick bank because it gives you 12 weeks of paid leave on top of any other time you can have. So we changed some things in there. You can now get into the group sick bank on your 2nd anniversary, which is real close to about how long it would take you to get into the group sick bank with the old handbook. I think I got into it like when I was here 2 years and 2 months. That's when the January happened. So had to pick a day that somehow aligned similar to the old handbook. When you join, you still have to donate the hours for the first 2 years. Let's see, FMLA policy, Taylor went through that and kind of condensed it and reworked it.
There's just a lot of fluff in it that didn't need to be in there.
The drug testing policy for our random drug testing. We had sent over a copy of the old handbook over to Workwell. They do our drug testing and just kind of made it more aligned with what they're currently doing. It was a little bit outdated. The police department didn't have an on-call policy in the old handbook, so we added that to match our current practice. Comp hours, we reduced those to 140 in the old handbook. Some of them were at 240, some of them were at 140. Now, pretty much citywide, the most comp hours you can accrue is 140, and that will help with when people leave, people not having an obscene amount of comp time. It should make it a little more economical for the city. And then Taylor also went through the whole handbook and just really cleaned up a lot of sections for legal reasons.
Well, and I have to say, Julie put in a lot of time too, policy by policy to make sure, because we talked about this from the beginning, it's very important that your actual practice matches what the policy says. So went through it with a fine tooth comb and aligned everything up. So I think you probably have it memorized by now, right? But
I don't know about that.
It does, as far as we know now, everything is very current and matches actual practice.
That's got little highlights on them. There were, little things here and there, but this is like the major things.
Dr. King, you got anything to add from your involvement?
Just my thank you to all the people that are on the committee. I know they work very hard. I can't imagine what they went through, just the time that I spent going through the manuals and then the revisions, and I know that they did much more than I did. So your work is greatly appreciated by the Board of Works. And Taylor, you're outstanding.
Taylor's been very helpful to this process. Glenn, did you have other thoughts or concerns,
No, I
questions?
think I addressed all those in an earlier meeting. You met with all the employees, or given them opportunity to understand this. And, well, with all the department heads, right?
Department heads, yes.
And they have, I trust, done something with their employees to get some understanding. Oh, there's not anybody here, so I either they're unaware of it or they're aware of it and satisfied.
Well, I think that the people involved tried to make the 3 handbooks and consolidating into one to make it equitable for all the employees. It's not possible to do that, but you can certainly get real close. So for those who got more before and now they have less, I'm sure they're going to complain a little bit. And the people who had less were getting more, are much more happy, okay?
Well, I don't expect I don't expect this to be nirvana, I don't expect this to get to that point, but I just want to make sure that it's not something that's, come January 1, everybody's gonna come with signs and protest.
Well, yeah, I hope not either. Part of what we have done, department heads have been sent drafts of this and have been engaged in that, and I trust them to understand what their department needs are represented by, right? And we've taken their critiques and criticism and suggestions and put all of that into here. And so what I think we've done is, maybe not every frontline employee has seen this because it's a draft and
Sure.
typically don't share drafts too much. But I do think that there has been a lot of discussion by our department leaders. Is this good for your department? And I think generally the consensus is yes. And so, to Dr. King's point, I think there is a point where they're going to be, some people say, well, why didn't we do this? Or I don't like that. But honestly, we're making decisions for 120 employees. It's gonna happen. I think it's a lot better. I think we cleaned up the city's side substantially from a legal perspective, an administrative perspective, a cost perspective. I think we've given more benefits. I don't think we've taken any benefits away. We've restructured some of those, and I think we've made it a lot easier, sort of really modernized it.
A lot more autonomy now.
Yeah, and I think that's good.
Yeah.
But no, we haven't shared it with every frontline employee,
Okay.
but their representation, the department heads have been directly involved.
And assuming this will be approved, well before January when it's supposed to be rolled out, education and training will definitely, be in the mix of that, well before it's rolled out.
But we can't go train or inform people on
No,
something that's not.
That's true. Yeah, I appreciate the effort that was made and what I've seen, I think it's workable. I agree with your assessment that it has probably improved things administratively, cost-wise, and legally.
Are we ready to move forward to make a vote on it?
I'm willing to make a
we just
recommendation. I
have-
think, go ahead,
Can we just
Deanne.
have a few minutes to read through and, I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but I'd like to read a couple things.
Sure.
And also, I just had a question. I just happened to see the lactation policy and, that's something that I'm going through right now, so I just have a couple questions. It's great that we have a lactation policy and, did you help put those, legally, make sure that we're
Yes.
on legal standing with those? Okay. The one thing I would note is, it says up to 12 months or 1 year. Is that, from a legal standpoint, or?
As far as the lactation policy, what does it say with regard, I'm sorry,
It
I don't
says
recall that.
provide.
It says that we're gonna provide a, paid breaks as much as often as, lactation is needed for up to 1 year after.
Yeah, that's set by Indiana statute. Offhand though, that might be even providing more time than statute, because I know for teachers, I wanna say it's 6 months after the date of birth, but yes, typically for state employees or governmental entities, it's set by statute.
Okay. Well, I just know that, I don't know how many city employees we have that are in that situation, but, so breast milk changes for up to 2 years of the baby's life. So if someone is making the choice to breastfeed and they're hitting that 1 year mark, they're likely to extend to 18 months to 24 months. So what, in that case, are we not offering them any breaks to
Well,
lactate at that?
legally, from a federal law perspective and state, if someone has any kind of physical, mental issue that requires some kind of accommodation, breastfeeding would be one of those, you by law have to engage in that kind of discussion and accommodate what's reasonable. So, probably 10 times out of 10, if an employee came and needed more time, that would be a legal requirement to accommodate that. So you would go beyond what the policy requires, because it's a federal requirement.
So there wouldn't be an issue, like if an employee who is in that situation, who wanted to breastfeed 18 to 24 months, they could then approach their employer and work something out?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Great question. Great question.
There was one other typical, work schedule for firemen? Are they on 24 off?
So we work a 24/48 schedule, and there's usually 3 cycles of that creates a window, so to speak. So they work 24 hours and then they're off for 48, and they repeat that cycle continuously. And they have paid absent days that they get, they have PTO days, they have vacation, and they're sick that they can take, or they can do trades. There's school time in there that they can miss during the day if they're in class. Yeah, so it is an area reimbursed for the full 24 hours.
Okay, so if, fireman is taking PTO, do they have to use 24 hours of PTO for that?
Currently that's how I have allowed them in talking with Julie have the flexibility of allowing them to take half of their PTO, because since their PTO is done in hours, they can take that. Vacations is the only thing that's really hardlined in the policy that they have to take that time. And we're just trying to do that as a way to increase some morale and make it a little bit more user-friendly and flexible to do that. If I can lose a guy for 12 hours versus 24 hours, and that saves on overtime, that saves on backfill, if they only need the first 12 off, there's no sense in making him take the full 24 off, because the department, the city that ends up costing them more than just allowing him off for whatever time that he needs. So we do try to make reasonable accommodations, sometimes even outside of the handbook, just to assist in the treatment of our personnel, I guess.
Could you just, I just wanted to lastly look at the addendums for fire and police. If you wanted to briefly mention what's in there, I'm happy to do that, or just read
Yeah,
it.
no, it's mostly about overtime compensation, like the overtime pay. It's just slightly different for each department because of the hours they work. Because the fire department works on average a 53-hour week. The police department has those 8-hour employees, those 10-hour employees. Each one had to be slightly different, and Taylor went through and kind of pulled out the things that were different from one department to the next, and then put them in the addendums.
Okay.
Trying
I'm
to think if
assuming
there's-
that the wording is, and the different hours is mostly just to make it as fair and equal as possible.
Well,
And-
that's actually set by federal law under the FLSA, and there's different, based on the pay period, or not the pay periods, but the work periods, there's different requirements of when overtime gets triggered. So rather than combining that into one policy and confusing everyone, I thought it was easier just keep it as separate addendums.
Well, knowing that, all the people that were involved in this, I'm not gonna like read word by word. I trust everyone's expertise in it, so I don't have any questions.
If we would like, I would entertain a motion to pass the handbook on to the council for approval with the slight edit that we mentioned at least no more than 2 members of the Board of Works members be a part of the unpaid leave of absence policy.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made by Glenn, seconded by Rodney. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion will carry. Anything else for the board to consider today? If not, thank you all for being here, appreciate it, and we take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion's been made by Rodney. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.